Good afternoon and welcome to Design Master Training. My name is David Robinson. Today we are going to be looking at selective coordination curves in Design Master Electrical for Revit. If you are attending the training live, you can ask questions in the chat box. If you're watching the recording of the training, you can call or email your questions. Our phone number is 866-516-9497 and our email address is support@designmaster.biz. So the topic for today is breaker curves and selective coordination. This is a feature that we added within the last couple of years, and it lets you handle your breaker curves in Revit with our software. I'm going to run the panel edit command. And the way that you assign your breaker curve is you have to choose what breaker you're working with, and you do that by selecting a specific panel. So if I take this MDP2 here, you have an option for the main disconnect. So if you have a main breaker on a panel, you can specify the curve there, and you can use the select curve button. You also have the upstream connection. This is the overcurrent protection. So for this MDP, it's actually the breaker that's in the switchboard. But since it's kind of related to the MDP, it's the overcurrent protection for the MDP. You specify the breaker curve at the MDP, not in the switchboard. Even though it's the breaker physically lives in the switchboard, it's providing protection for MDP. So you press the select breaker curve, and that's going to give you a list of breakers that you can choose that we have included in the software. It's a pretty extensive list. We've got a lot of breakers in there. We, in particular, have a lot of the currently manufactured breakers that exist in there. So you just go and you find the breaker and you select it. If you're looking for a breaker that doesn't exist, we have a link here. You can click on our email address. Let us know what breaker you are looking for. If you're looking for a breaker, there's two things that we generally want to get from you to help us find the breaker. If this is new construction where you're specifying a new breaker, a link to that breaker on the internet is helpful. Hey, here's the manufacturer's website. This is the breaker that we're trying to specify. That way we actually know that it exists, and that helps us find the breaker curve. If it's an existing installation, a picture of the actual physical breaker is helpful. A lot of times, particularly with older breakers, we're having to track them down. And so if you actually send us a picture, that way we have all the information that can be known. Half the time we send off that picture to the manufacturer, they go dig it out of their archives and send us the breaker curves for that. Because a lot of the existing stuff, you're dealing with stuff that's 40, 60 years old. Those breaker curves exist, but the companies have been bought out and acquired, and so that breaker curve is bounced around between different companies. But they're all findable. So if you need something that's not in here, let us know. It's a pretty good list at this point. So your common breakers are going to be in here. We have a pretty good Eaton and Square D catalog in particular, because most people seem to have standardized on those. We've got a pretty good list of those, but we can add more if you need them. We list all of the breakers that are applicable for the trip size that you're looking at. So this is a 100 amp panel. It has an 100 amp overcurrent protection. So we're listing just the breakers that have 100 amp options at this voltage with this number of volts. So it's a 480 volt panel, it's a 3-pole breaker. So those are the breakers that we're going to show you. We're not going to show you the breaker options that aren't applicable. And so you just kind of can scroll down and find what you want. So if you're looking at Eaton, kind of up at the top, we've got these low volt and medium voltage breakers. Then we've got their molded case breakers based upon their frame type. So lots of different options that exist. We'll take this one. When you select the specific breaker, you then get some more options, just depending on the breaker that you selected. So this one happens to have two sensor types. So it can be a 125 amp sensor or a 250 amp sensor. So you're going to get slightly different curves based upon that. So this is where you actually need to know what you're putting in your actual project. So the specific breaker type does matter. And then we have, this is an electronic breaker. So we've got the various settings that we have here for the breaker, the delay and short time pickup and delay settings. So we can specify whatever it is and click OK. And now that's set for that breaker. So MDP2 has a breaker for the overcurrent protection. We can then use these selective coordination buttons to get that breaker curve drawn for us on a drafting view. We'll do the graph insert. We will select MDP2, click OK. This actually has the main disconnect and the feeder, so it's asking us which one of those breakers do we want to specify. We're working with feeder breaker. We'll select that, click OK, specify a point on the drawing, and it draws our curve for us. So it puts together this graph, shows the curve in there. We can then specify another curve and also include that on that graph. So we'll take LP2, I'll select my breaker curve, and this time we will choose a thermal magnetic breaker just to see how that looks different. Select Eaton. If I scroll down, there's some thermal magnetics down here. We'll take this one. It's got some options for the instantaneous pickup in this case. We'll take the default. We've added it to that piece of equipment. Now I can edit this graph, add a new piece of equipment to it. We'll take LP2. We've added the curve to the graph and it draws it in there. These are both 100 amp breakers, so they're not really going to coordinate all that well. So that's what you end up with. They're overlapping, essentially saying these are not coordinated. This one will generally trip before this one though. And so at this point, then you can start making changes to these curves to actually get them coordinated or see if they're going to coordinate. In this case, we can run I'm going to run the graph edit. Here you can actually change, if you select a piece of equipment, you can change the equipment settings. I'm going to take this MDP and I'm going to change it from 100 amp to a 200 amp panel. When we do that, okay, there we go. So now we have the 200 amp breaker. And so we've got 100 amp and a 200 amp breaker. So we can actually coordinate these. And now it's just a matter of adjusting the settings. To adjust the settings, you can run the curve edit command and you can select either the curve itself or the label pointing to that curve. So we'll select this label. It'll pull up those settings. And to make your changes to your settings, you do have to go through the curve edit again. You can't grab that and move the curve around it. Our software doesn't work that way. So you have your long time pickup, which is this first section of the curve. That's really based upon your trip. So we don't let you set that because that's kind of a function of the breaker size. Then we have the long time delay, which is this first portion of the curve. We want to actually move that up. So I'll set that to 24. The short time pickup is going to be this vertical piece. The I squared T is whether this is flat or it has one more curve in here. This breaker happens to not have that as an option. The short time delay is this other horizontal piece. And then the instantaneous pickup is the last vertical piece back here. So you can make your changes, click OK, and see what that ends up looking like. So in this case, even with that long time delay set to the maximum, it's still not actually coordinating terribly well with this breaker. So this is probably not a good choice of two breakers. But now we know that based upon having included these on this graph. If we edit the thermal magnetic curve, there are fewer options for the thermal curves because the curve is fixed. You sometimes can specify what that instantaneous pickup is, which is basically this last portion here. So if I adjust that from 5 times to 10 times, that'll pull that curve out looking like that. So those are the options that we have for adjusting those curves. So in terms of using this feature in your design work, it's a matter, the hardest part is really knowing what breaker you have and then mapping that breaker to what we have in our database where you go and select it. But once you've selected it, displaying the graph and playing with the numbers is fairly straightforward. And in terms of those settings, you do need to know how it's being set in the field so that you get the curve drawn as it's actually going to be installed. There are some options for what this graph looks like. So we're going to take a look at that a little bit. If I run the graph edit command, there are a couple more commands here. First of all, we have a title. We also have a subtitle. This is our MDP2 coordination graph. We could do something like that. And then you can also do a note. And that's just some additional text that's going to show up in your graph here. So the subtitle ends up here. The note ends up down here. Go back, take a look at the graph edit again. You have the list of curves. You can have as many curves as you want. As you start to get more curves, it starts to get a little bit messier, but you can put as many in there as you want. The add distribution equipment curve, that lets you select essentially a panel. If you have a branch circuit device, so not a panel like an air handler or a motor that you want to include, you use the select equipment from project button. And when you run that, you can then go select it either from the plan view. If you have it on your single line, you can select it from the single line. The other place is if you have it in a view, if we want that cooling tower essentially corresponds to this piece here. So you can go and select it from your model as well if it's not on your single line. You do need to have the view open when you run it. So the workflow is you make sure you can see it somewhere in a view, run graph insert or graph edit, select from the project. Now you can actually go to this different view and go select something. We could select this cooling tower. We actually could include a curve for just a single receptacle if we wanted to. We'll select that. We'll click OK, and now it's going to include it. You'll notice it draws this big X on here. And for that cooling tower, the curve is set. So if you select something where you haven't specified what the curve is, this is what you end up with. And then you need to go back and actually specify that curve. So we can run curve edit, select the cooling tower, and assign a breaker to it. We'll stick with Eaton. So at least we're within the same manufacturer. And there's the curve for that. So these two buttons down here are for adding the curves. You can also use this button to remove the curve. So that's just for managing which curves are being displayed. You can edit the curve settings from here. So you can select one of these curves and actually go edit the settings this way rather than running the curve edit. So it's just a different way to get to the same window for setting your curve settings. And then I showed this previously. You can also edit the equipment settings directly. So if you need to go make a change to that piece of equipment, you run edit equipment settings and you can specify that. We can also move these curves up and down, not just reorders them, because you can see over here on the right-hand side that they're listed in the order that you have them displayed here. So that just gives you control over how these are going to be displayed. And then we actually layer them on top of each other that way. So if we wanted to take this LP2 and have it on top of this other one, if we move it up, it's going to reorder them on this right-hand side and then reorder them this way. We can also do formatting of what this graph ends up looking like. We give you limited formatting options. We kind of intentionally limited it because we don't want you just spending your whole life mucking around with how these graphs look. We tried to put together something that's going to look good out of the box that you can generally work with without having to do any adjustment. So the location of all the labels and where these leaders show up, that's actually all fixed. So you can't make any changes to that. But you can make some changes to the layer styles and some of the line type work. That is all going to be controlled under customization and project options. We have a selective coordination graph section, and that controls where all of those are set. So you can set your default title. That's when you make a new graph, what the title is going to be when it comes in. You can change that on a specific graph, but that's the default. Then you can actually specify the text styles that are being used. Right now, all of this text actually comes in on the last text style that Revit was using. So you probably want to actually set this to the text styles that you are using. In this project, it has an 1/8 inch and a 1/4 inch aerial. We'll just use those settings. So that can change the label and the title and then all the labels. And actually, I'm going to flip that because I want the title to be bigger. So now we'll have 1/8 inch or 1/4 inch text for the label and 1/8 inch text, or 1/4 inch for the title and 1/8 inch for all of the all the non-title, all the labels and everything else. You also can choose whether you're going to draw the border or not. We'll turn the border off just to show that. Click OK. If we update this graph, it'll update it with those new settings. So there it is, got rid of the border and it adjusted the text styles for us. All of the line type styles are also adjustable. We, out of the box, have our line styles. And if you're using these, we will create them for you using kind of our default settings. You can specify different line styles if you have your own that you've defined, or you can take ours and modify them. The line styles are controlled in Revit under Manage, Additional Settings, Line Styles. If we expand these lines, you'll see that we've got all our Design Master ones that have been created. So this is where you can come and make adjustments using just standard Revit. So the minor grid lines we've set to a gray and then that dashed line. So that's how we get this appearance looking. And there's also the fills that are happening for the curves. And those are controlled. I'm trying to remember the other way, but if you select one, you can edit it, and then this will pull up the type properties. And this is where you can make new types and modify what they look like. So we have our 3 types that we've created. You can create your own and assign it, or you can take ours and modify them, and then you can make adjustments. So this one is set to be this light gray. If you want to do a different color, you could adjust it. You could do a yellow one. There we go. So if you want to start playing with color, you can do that. Checking the options, that covers all of the options. So it's just a little bit of functionality you have for adjusting the text style and the line type styles. Otherwise, the rest of the formatting we are going to handle automatically, just laying them out in a way that looks reasonable so that you can get these graphs in your projects. The graphs are all at a specific voltage. We do list that down here. So we take the voltage from the first device. So if you have multiple voltages, that will shift your curves back and forth. So if we add a curve that is at a different voltage, we got this transformer. So this is going to be at 208 volts. And let's edit those settings so that we have a curve on it. So this is a 100 amp breaker, but at 208 volts. And so rather than being at 108, it's shifted because of the 208 volt. And that is what we have for selective coordination and breaker curves in the software. If there are any questions related to that or anything else in the software, I can answer those now. Thank you for watching today's Design Master training. Contact us with questions or comments by calling 866-516-9497 or emailing support@designmaster.biz.